The desert rain wasn't gentle. It was a hammering assault on the roof of Alara's aging Corolla, turning the highway outside Phoenix into a slick, black mirror reflecting nothing but her own isolation. The strange thump 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 coming from the trunk, irregular and insistent, had started miles back. Logic said it was probably a loose spare tire bouncing in its well. But the rain, the desolate stretch of road, the way the sound seemed to syncopate with her own frantic heartbeat. Logic was losing. Just check. Quick look and go, she muttered, pulling onto the crumbling gravel shoulder. The headlights carved a short, pathetic tunnel in the downpour before being swallowed by the ink-black night. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only other sound besides the drumming rain. She grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from the passenger seat, its beam cutting a shaky path as she stepped out. The cold rain instantly soaked her hair and jacket. Crouching behind the car, the trunk lid felt cold and slick under her fingers. She aimed the beam into the dark cavity. Spare tire, jumper cables, an old blanket. Nothing amiss. The thumping had stopped. Relief, thin and cold, washed over her. Just the tire. Stupid. Then a distinct, undeniable tap on her left shoulder. Not rain. Solid. Deliberate. Alara froze. Every hair on her body stood rigid. The flashlight beam trembled violently, illuminating wet gravel and the car's muddy undercarriage. Her breath hitched, a strangled sound lost in the downpour. Slowly, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, she whipped around, flashlight slicing through the darkness beside the car. Nothing, just a relentless rain. The empty highway stretching into oblivion behind her, the vast, unseen desert pressing in on all sides. The shoulder was empty. The beam swept the scrubby bushes nearby. Nothing stirred but rain-lashed branches. Hello? Her voice was a dry rasp, swallowed instantly by the storm. Silence answered. Had she imagined it? The stress, the rain playing tricks? But the sensation had been so real, a cold, damp pressure through her jacket. Panic, pure and electric, surged through her. She scrambled backwards, her boots slipping on the muddy gravel, fumbling for the driver's door handle. She yanked it open, threw herself inside, slammed the door, and hit the locks with a frantic slap. Click, click, click. The sound was absurdly loud in the sudden, rain-drummed sanctuary of the car. She slumped against the steering wheel, gasping, rain streaming down her face, mixing with tears of fright she hadn't realized were falling. Just nerves. Just rain. Get it together, Alara. She forced herself to take deep, shuddering breaths, the defroster blasting lukewarm air onto the fogging windshield. She needed to see to confirm the emptiness outside. Wiping her eyes with a trembling hand, she looked up at her driver's side window and saw it, smudged across the glass, stark against the streaking rain outside, were fingerprints, thick, muddy fingerprints. 5 distinct smears, pressed on the inside of the glass, right where her shoulder had been resting against the seat just moments before she got out. They were large, masculine, fresh. The mud was the same reddish-brown sludge coating the roadside. A choked scream died in her throat. She hadn't imagined the tap. Someone had been there, right behind her, close enough to touch her. And while she was outside, blinded by the flashlight, heart pounding in her ears, he hadn't run. He hadn't made a sound. He had opened her unlocked car door, reached inside and placed his muddy hand right there. The horror wasn't just a violation, the proximity of the unseen predator. It was the silence, the absolute, unnatural silence of his movements. He'd been close enough for her to feel his tap, yet she'd heard nothing, no footsteps in the gravel, no rustled clothing, no breath, just a rain, and then that terrible, intimate contact. Trembling violently, she jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. She didn't look back. She just slammed the car into drive and fishtailed back onto the highway, tires spraying mud and gravel, accelerating until the speedometer needle trembled near 90. The rain lashed as a terrifying blur outside the smeared windows. Hours later, safe behind the bright, harsh lights of Phoenix police station, wrapped in a coarse blanket, Lara recounted her story to a skeptical officer. Her car sat outside, being processed. The muddy prints were still there, undeniable. "Ma'am," the officer said, returning from a back room, his earlier skepticism replaced by a grim, professional tension. "We pulled the CCTV footage from the traffic cam at the junction about a mile before where you stopped." He paused, his eyes holding hers. There was someone. He led her to a monitor. The grainy, rain-streaked black and white footage showed her car pulled over, her flashlight beam a tiny, bobbing star near the trunk. And there, just beyond the reach of her light, partially obscured by the bulk of her Corolla, was a figure. A man, tall, wearing dark, sodden clothes, his features blurred by distance and weather. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was pacing, a slow, deliberate circuit around her parked car, past the trunk where she crouched, oblivious, past the passenger side, around the front, past the driver's side door. He moved with a strange, unhurried purpose, like a shark circling prey. He paused sometimes, staring at the car, his head tilted. Once, he stopped right by the driver's door. The exact moment, Lara realized with a fresh wave of nausea when she must have been crouched at the trunk, flashlight pointed inside. He leaned in close to the window. The timestamp in the corner ticked relentlessly. He completed one circuit, then another, and another. His movements were utterly silent on the tape, just the hiss of rain and the distant hum of the highway. There was no audio of a tap, of course, just a visual of a silent, predatory orbit. 15 minutes, the officer said quietly, his voice tight. He was out there, circling your car, watching you, for nearly 15 minutes. Never made a sound the camera could pick up. Not a shout, not a footstep on the gravel, nothing. When you finally got back in, he fast-forwarded slightly. The figure watched her scramble inside. He didn't flee. He didn't approach the window immediately. He simply stood there in the rain, a dark sentinel, for a full minute after she locked the doors. Then, with that same eerie calm, he walked to the driver's door, tried the handle, finding it locked this time, and then placed his hand flat against the window glass for a long moment, leaving the mud Lara had seen smeared inside. Finally, he turned and walked calmly out the shoulder, disappearing into the scrub and the relentless, swallowing dark of the desert. The terror Lara felt now wasn't a sharp spike of panic on the roadside. It was a deep, freezing dread that seeped into her bones. 15 minutes. He hadn't been a fleeting shadow or a figment of stress. He'd been a silent, patient observer. He'd watched her vulnerability, studied her fear without making a single sound she could perceive. He'd touched her. He'd invaded her car. He'd left his mark not just on the glass, but on the very core of her sense of safety. And he'd done it all in absolute, unnatural silence. The silence wasn't just absence. It was the sound of a predator who knew he didn't need to make a noise to terrify. The most horrifying part wasn't what he might have done. It was a chilling, silent intent with which he had done nothing but watch, wait, and touch. And the knowledge that somewhere out there in the rainy dark, a man moved without sound, and his patience was far more terrifying than any scream. Second story, the uninvited houseguest. The Miller family arrived home from 2 weeks in Fiji carrying the scent of salt water and sunscreen, their bodies still humming with the rhythm of the waves. The Melbourne suburb was quiet, bathed in the soft, gray light of late afternoon. Unlocking the front door, they were greeted by the familiar, slightly stale smell of a house left closed up, Nothing seemed to miss. The mail was neatly stacked on the hall table. The cushions on the living room sofa were perfectly plumped. Not a speck of dust out of place. "See," Mark chuckled, dropping suitcases with a thud. "Told you Mrs. Peterson next door would keep an eye out. Looks untouched." Sarah smiled, relief washing over her. It felt good to be home. But that first night it began. At precisely 2:02 a.m., a harsh, white light exploded from the living room, flooding the hallway under their bedroom door. Sarah jolted awake, heart hammering. The motion sensors, the expensive security system they'd installed before leaving. Mark mumbled beside her. "Cat?" he slurred, half asleep. "Must have triggered it." They listened. Silence. Utter, thick silence from downstairs. No skittering claws, no thump. Just a fading hum of the powerful lights cycling off, plunging the house back into darkness. Unease prickled Sarah's skin. She checked the bedside monitor, linked to the security cameras downstairs. Empty, just the familiar shapes of their furniture in grainy night vision. She told herself it was nothing. It happened again the next night. 2:02 a.m. The sudden, blinding glare, the eerie silence that followed, and the next, always 2:02 a.m. Like clockwork. No sound, no disturbance. Just the lights screaming into the void for 30 seconds, then dying. The perfection of their untouched house now felt sinister. Too perfect, like a stage set. Fear replaced fatigue. Sleep became impossible as 2 a.m. approached. They'd lie rigid, waiting for the inevitable burst of light. Mark insisted on checking the footage each morning. Day after day, the cameras showed nothing. Empty rooms, static furniture, the lights triggering on, nothing. The system logs confirmed it. Motion detected in the living room. Every night, 2:02 a.m. "Enough," Sarah declared, voice tight with strain on the fifth morning, dark circles bruising her eyes. "We're reviewing all the footage, from the start, minute by minute." They gathered around Mark's laptop, the cheerful morning sun feeling like a cruel joke. They fast-forwarded through hours of empty night vision footage, the timestamp blurring past midnight. Then 1:00 a.m., 1:30 a.m., 1:58, 1:59. The living room camera view filled the screen. Couch, coffee table, bookshelf, empty. Then, at 2 a.m. exactly, the figure appeared, not walking in, not breaking a window, just there, sitting upright on their sofa, facing the camera mounted high in the corner, as if he'd materialized in the space between one frame and the next. Sarah gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Mark froze, the color draining from his face. He was pale, gaunt, wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up, but underneath a faded baseball cap pulled low, casting deep shadows over his eyes. Yet they could feel his gaze. He was staring directly into the lens, unblinking, utterly still. His hands rested loosely on his knees. He didn't fidget, didn't look around, didn't touch the remote on the coffee table inches from his hand. He just sat and watched the camera, them by proxy. At 2:02 a.m., the motion sensors triggered. The powerful lights flooded the room, bleaching the night vision green into stark black and white. The figure didn't flinch, didn't shield his eyes, didn't move a muscle. He simply sat, illuminated, staring directly, relentlessly into the camera's unblinking eye for the entire 30 seconds the lights blazed. Then, as the light snapped off at 2 hours, 2 minutes, and 30 seconds, plunging the room back into the grainy green glow, he vanished, not getting up, not walking away, just gone, between one frame and the next, leaving only the empty couch behind. Terror, cold and greasy, coiled in their stomachs. This wasn't random. This wasn't an animal. Someone had been sitting silently in their living room, night after night, watching, waiting, utterly still, untouched by the alarm screaming light around him, a ghost in a baseball cap. They called the police, trembling, showing them the footage. The officers, initially skeptical, grew quiet as they watched the pale figure appear, stare, and vanish under blazing lights. They canvassed the neighborhood, checked the house meticulously, found no forced entry, no tampering with the alarm system. It was impossible. Yet there he was. Days later, a detective called. His voice was carefully neutral. We identified him. A pause. Heavy. Lives 3 doors down. Mrs. Henderson's son. Liam, 19. Another pause. He knew the code to your alarm panel. His mom mentioned it to him months ago. Apparently, when she watered your plants once, he'd been using it for weeks since before you left. The explanation landed like a physical blow, not a phantom, a neighbor's son. He knew the house, knew the code, knew their routines. He just walked in like he owned the place, sat down, night after night. The police spoke to Liam. He was quiet, withdrawn, offered no explanation, no reason, just confirmed it. Yes, it was him. Yes, he'd been sitting there, watching. He hadn't taken anything, hadn't damaged anything, hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. That was the true horror that lingered long after the police report was filed. The utter, chilling banality of it. The silent figure wasn't a demon. It was just Liam Henderson, sitting in their darkened living room, night after night, staring at the camera, seeing everything, saying nothing, moving nothing. A silent, pale watcher in a baseball cap who lived 3 doors down. And the knowledge that he'd been there, perfectly still, perfectly silent, perfectly invisible in the heart of their home, while they slept just upstairs, was a chill that never truly left. Every creak of the house after dark, every flicker of shadow, carried the echo of his silent, staring presence. The Bavarian forest breathed that afternoon. Sunlight, thick as honey, dripped through ancient pines, dappling the moss-carpeted path where Anya and Leo hiked. The air hummed with insects and the damp, earthy scent of decay and growth. It was peaceful, too peaceful, Leo would think later, like the forest was holding its breath. They were debating which fork to take when it came. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Leo, a woman's voice, strained, drifting through the trees to their left. Leo stopped mid-sentence, head snapping up. Did you hear that? Anya frowned, listening. Hear what? Anya, this time clearer, from the same direction. A man's voice, low and urgent. Anya's blood ran cold. It sounded like Leo, but wrong. Flattened, desperate. Okay, Leo whispered, grabbing her arm. That was not me. And that wasn't you calling me either. Silence descended, heavier than before. The cheerful bird song seemed muffled now. They strained their ears. Nothing but the rustle of leaves high above. No crunch of footsteps. No voices calling again. Just the oppressive, watchful silence of the woods. Let's just get back to the main path, Anya murmured, her voice tight. They quickened their pace, the playful mood of the hike utterly shattered. 10 minutes later, rounding a bend where the path skirted a particularly dense thicket of ferns, Leo froze. He pointed downwards. Beside the worn dirt path, pressed deep into the soft, dark earth, was a single footprint, then another and another, leading into the ferns, perpendicular to their trail. The prints were large, hiking boot treads clearly visible, sinking deep as if the person had been running. Someone was there. Anya breathed, relief warring with unease. Must have cut through the brush. Leo, ever practical, pushed aside the waist-high ferns, following the trail. Anya stayed on the path, watching him disappear into the green gloom. She counted his steps. 5, 10, 15, then silence. "Leo," she called, her voice sounding small. He reappeared, his face pale beneath his tan. He looked bewildered. They just stopped," he said, his voice hushed. 20 steps in, right in the middle of a patch of moss. No sign they turned around. No broken branches beyond. Nothing. Just footprints leading into nowhere. The walk back to their rented cabin was tense and silent. The forest, once beautiful, felt like a vast, silent predator. That evening, huddled by the wood stove, the unsettling events gnawed at them. Leo pulled out his phone, searching online, Bavarian forest disappearances. Strange occurrences. Buried in a local hiking forum, years old, he found it. A grainy scanned image of a police bulletin. Missing, Thomas Vogel, age 24. Last seen near the Teufelsloch, Devil's Hole, area. Leo's finger traced a map reference. Their exact trail that afternoon. The bulletin mentioned his last known communication. A garbled voicemail left for his girlfriend. The final, chilling words transcribed. "They're right behind me. Can't shake them. The trees, they sound like." Then the line went dead. Static. A cold dread settled deep in Anya's bones. The voices, "Leo," they called our names. Like they knew. Days later, tried to reclaim some normalcy, they visited the small village Goss house. Over steaming mugs of glühwein, they hesitantly mentioned the footprints, the voices, avoiding the bulletin. The old bartender, polishing a glass, paused, his eyes, roomy but sharp, fixed on them. "Asich," he sighed, a sound like dry leaves. "You walked near the Teufelsloch, ja? Seen the Blutman, then..." "The blood man?" Leo asked. The old man nodded slowly. "Ja, some say it's young Vogel. Others, older things. Lost souls drawn to where the earth is thin." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Happens after heavy rains, mostly, or deep fog. Folks see him. Just a glimpse mine, between the big spruce trunks, down near the wet ravines. Looks like a man, but broken, stumbling, always wearing a jacket, dark, soaked through." The old man tapped his own chest, like it's dipped in wine. "Only it ain't wine, see?" And then, poof, gone behind a tree, like he was never there. Leaves nothing behind but the cold feeling. And sometimes you think you hear your name, whispered from where he vanished. Anya shuddered, the warmth of the wine doing nothing against the ice in her veins. She remembered the desperate mimicry of their names, the impossible footprints ending in untouched moss, the final, terrified words of Thomas Vogel. They cut their trip short. On the drive out the next morning, mist clung to the lower valleys, snaking around the massive tree trunks like spectral fingers. Anya stared out the window, her reflection pale against the passing forest. As they rounded a curve overlooking the deep ravine near the Teufelsloch, her breath hitched. There, between two moss-draped spruces, a flicker of movement, a figure, half obscured by mist and shadow, hunched, staggering, and across its back, stark against the green-gray gloom, a patch of color so dark it seemed to swallow the light. A deep, wet crimson, like a wound on the forest itself. It turned its head, a mere suggestion of a pale face lost in shadow, seeming to look directly at the passing car. Then it took one lurching step sideways, behind the massive trunk of an ancient beech tree. When Leo glanced over a second later, following her frozen stare, there was nothing, just a mist, the trees, and the empty, watchful silence of the Bavarian forest. A silence that now held the echo of a name called from the shadows, and the phantom tread of boots leading only to the edge of oblivion. Anya didn't speak. She just kept driving, her knuckles white on the wheel, knowing some paths lead you out of the woods, and some paths lead you deeper into a story that doesn't end, not even in death. The Blutman was still walking, still listening, still waiting for someone else to hear their name whispered from the wrong side of the trees. Fourth story. The phantom caller at 3:13 a.m. The city glow through Ellie's new loft windows was supposed to be exciting. Downtown Chicago, skyline views, independence. For the first week, it was. Then the silence of 3 a.m. started to feel less peaceful, more expectant. It began subtly, a phantom vibration jolting her awake one night. Groggy, she checked her phone. One new voicemail. Time received, 3:13 a.m. She played it, holding the speaker to her ear. Silence. Then a wet, rasping inhalation, deep, deliberate, followed by a choked, muffled sob, barely audible but unmistakable. It lasted 8 seconds. Then dead air. Wrong number, she thought, deleting it, her skin prickling despite the logic. Sleep didn't come easy. The next night, it happened again. 3:13 a.m. The same voicemail notification. The same heavy, labored breathing. The same fragile, broken weeping swallowed by the recording. 8 seconds. Dread became a cold stone in her stomach. She saved the number this time. In the stark light of morning, fortified by coffee and traffic noise, she dialed it back. A flat, automated voice. Asterisk. The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again. Asterisk. Disconnected. But it had just called her. Twice. Night 3. 3:13 a.m. The phone lit up on her nightstand. Voicemail. She didn't play it immediately. She lay frozen, listening to the absolute quiet of her apartment, the distant hum of the city seeming miles away. Then she heard it. Asterisk clink. Rattle, rattle. Asterisk. Metal on metal. Sharp. Close. It came from her front door. Her blood turned to ice. She held her breath, straining every nerve. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, again, rattle, rattle, clink. Someone was testing her doorknob, trying it at 3:13 a.m. Paralysis locked her limbs. She fumbled for her phone, fingers numb, dialing 911 with trembling hands, whispering her address and the terrifying, simple fact. Asterisk. Someone's trying to get into my apartment. Right now. Please hurry. Asterisk. By the time the blue and red lights painted her walls, the hallway was empty. No one. The super, roused and bleary-eyed, confirmed the main building door was secure. No signs of forced entry. The police took a report, checked the hall, offered sympathy, and suggested better locks. They listened to the voicemails, the heavy breathing, the sobs, with professional neutrality, noting the disconnected number. Probably a prankster using a burner app. One officer offered, unconvincingly, but we'll log it. The voicemail stopped after that, but the damage was done. 3:13 a.m. became a witching hour. Ellie slept with the lights on, a baseball bat beside the bed, jumping at every settling creak of the old building. She triple-checked her deadbolt. The initial thrill of the city view was replaced by a constant, low-grade terror of what might be lurking just outside her door, or worse, inside the building. A week later, a different detective called. His voice was clipped, urgent. Ms. Ellis, we traced those calls. The number was spoofed, but we tracked the actual signal origin." He paused. "It came from inside your building, specifically the maintenance closet on your floor." Ellie's stomach dropped. The small, nondescript door down the hall, always locked. Or so she thought. "We need your super to open it. Now, we're on our way." Standing in the hallway, flanked by the super and two uniformed officers, Ellie watched as the super fumbled with his master key. The detective arrived, breathless. The lock clicked. The super pulled the door open, revealing not just brooms and buckets, but a cramped, dark space smelling of dust and something sour. A flashlight beam cut through the gloom. There, wedged between a leaking water heater and stacked paint cans, was a nest. Crushed cardboard boxes formed a crude mattress. Empty food wrappers littered the floor. And beside it, sitting upright, eyes wide and unblinking in the sudden light, was a man. Gaunt, filthy, wearing layers of grimy clothes. His hand was still curled around the receiver of an old, hardwired building phone jack. A line thought to be inactive, bypassing the disconnected number. The jack itself was ripped from the wall, wires exposed. On the floor beside him lay a cheap, prepaid cell phone, the source of the spoof calls. Its screen was dark, but its presence was damning. He wasn't making outside calls, the detective muttered, his voice tight with disbelief. He was dialing internal extensions. "Found yours. Used a landline in here to call your cell over and over. Cut the wire when he was done each time. Hid the cell." The man didn't struggle as the officers moved in. He just stared past them, directly at Ellie. His lips moved silently, mimicking the shape of a sob. His eyes held a terrifying, vacant intensity. The super paled. "Mr. Henderson? From 4B? But he was evicted months ago." He hadn't left. He'd simply retreated into the walls. Found a forgotten phone line. Found her, night after night. Curled in the dark, damp closet, he dialed her number, pressed the receiver to his ear to listen to her voicemail greeting, then breathed and wept into the silence. Until the night, he'd reached for her doorknob. As they led him away, his head swiveled, those empty eyes locking onto Ellie one last time. No words, just that awful, soundless imitation of crying. The true horror wasn't just a violation or the proximity. It was a realization that for weeks, the source of her sleepless terror hadn't been outside in the city night. It had been breathing the same stale air, separated from her by nothing more than a thin wall and a flimsy, locked door she'd walked past every single day. The sobs on the phone hadn't been a recording. They'd been live, performed for her, alone, by a ghost who'd never left, just steps from her pillow. And long after he was gone, the chime of 3:13 a.m. would still hold the echo of that ragged, unseen breath in the dark.